Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari.
Jaya Radha Madhava Jaya Kunja Bihari.
Jaya Gopi Jana Vallava Girivaradari.
Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradhari.
Yashodanandana Vraja Jana Ranjana.
Yashodanandana Braja Jana Ranjana.
Yamuna Tira Vanajari.
Yamuna Tira Vanachari.
Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Thank you very much, Ashwin. Hare Krishna, Prabhuji, Danvat Pranam. Please
Hare
accept our
Krishna.
humble obeisances. Prabhuji, it's that time, so we can start with the reading of the text, translation and purport, and we can then do the Mangalacharan and then hand over to you. Is that okay, Prabhuji?
Yeah, that's good. That's good.
Okay. Thank you, Prabhuji. How are you, Prabhuji?
I'm good. I'm good. It's nice to actually do service again in preaching, to be honest. It keeps
Thank you
me
so much.
engaged in service, actually, so it's good.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Prabhuji, for giving us your time. I believe that today is the last session. Then next week you will not be having time for some time. So then we'll meet whenever you have time. But I'll keep on pestering you. Don't worry.
Good.
Okay. Okay, Shashwin, let's start with Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Hare Krishna. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Narayanam Namaskrityam Naram Chaiva Narottamam Devim Saraswatim Vyasam Tato Jayamudirayet Nashtaprayeshva Badreshu Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya Bhagavatyuttama Shloker Bhaktir Bhavati Naishtikin. Hare Krishna. Suta Uvacha Yudhishthira Stadakarya Sayanam Sarapanjare Aprichad Vividan Dharman Risinam Chanus Srinvatam. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. We can now go on to word translation and purport and then do the Mangalacharan. Anybody would like to read, do the word to word? Okay, I can do the word to word. Sutta Huvacha, Sri Sutta Goswami said, Yudhishthira, King Yudhishthira, that, Akarnya, hearing, Sayanan, lying down, Sarapanjare, on the bed of arrows, Aprachat asked, Vibidhan, multifarious, Dharman, duties, Rishinam, of the rishis, Cha, and Anuswaratam, hearing after. Hare Krishna. Anybody would like to read the translation and purport?
Hare Krishna Mataji, I can do.
Okay, Prabhuji. Hare Krishna.
Translation. Sutta Goswami said, Maharaja Yudhishthira, after hearing Bhishmadeva speak in that appealing tone, asked him in the presence of all the great rishis about the essential principles of various religious duties. Purport by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada Ki Jai. Bhishmadeva, speaking in that appealing tone, convinced Maharaja Yudhishthira that he was very soon passing away. And Maharaja Yudhishthira was inspired by Lord Sri Krishna to ask him of the principles of religion. Lord Sri Krishna inspired Maharaja Yudhishthira to ask Bhishmadeva in the presence of many great sages, indicating thereby that the Lord's devotee like Bhishmadeva, although apparently living as a worldly man, is far superior to many great sages, even Vyasadeva. Another point is that Bhishmadeva at that time was not only lying on a deathbed of arrows, but was greatly aggrieved because of that state. One should not have asked him any question at that time. But Lord Sri Krishna wanted to prove that his pure devotees are always sound in body and mind by dint of spiritual enlightenment. And thus, in any circumstances, a devotee of the Lord is in perfect order to speak of the right way of life. Yudhishthira also preferred to solve his problematic questions by asking Bhishmadeva rather than ask anyone else present there who was seemingly more learned than Bhishmadeva. This is all due to the arrangement of great wheel carrier Lord Sri Krishna, who establishes the glories of his devotee. The father likes to see the son become more famous than himself. The Lord declares very emphatically that worship of his devotee is more valuable than the worship of the Lord himself. Hare Krishna. Thank you, Mataji.
Hare Krishna. Thank you very much, Hari Govind Prabhu. We will now continue on to the Mangalacharan Shashri Prabhu. Om Ajnana.
ज्ञानतिमिरन्दर्श्य ज्ञानाञ्जनाशलाकया चक्षुरुन्मिलितं येन तस्मै श्रीगुरुवे नमः। श्रीचैतन्यमनोभीष्टं स्थापितं येन भूतले स्वयं रूपकदा मायं ददाति स्वपदान्तिकं। वन्देऽहं श्रीगुरुन् श्रीयुतापदकमलं श्रीगुरुन् वैष्णवंश्च श्रीरूपं साग्रजातं सहगणा रघुनाथान्वितं तं सजीवं साद्वैतं स्वावधूतं परिजनासाहितं कृष्णचैतन्यदेवं श्रीराधा कृष्णपादान् सहगणा ललिता श्रीविशाखान्वितंश्च। हे कृष्णा करुणा सिन्धो दीनबन्धो जगत्पते गोपीश गोपिका कान्त राधा कान्त नमोऽस्तुते। तप्त काञ्चन गौराङ्गी राधे वृन्दावनेश्वरी वृषभानुष्टुते देवी प्रणमामि हरिप्रिये वाञ्छकल्पतरुभ्यश्च कृपा सिन्धुभ्येव च पतितानां पावनेभ्यो वैष्णवेभ्यो नमो नमः। जय श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत गदाधर श्रीवासादि गौर भक्तवृंद। हरे कृष्णा कृष्ण कृष्ण हरे 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 राम 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 हरे हरे।
Hare Krishna. Thank you so much, Ashwin, for this wonderful service. I know it is past your bedtime, but you still insist on starting us. So we are really, really grateful. Thank you very much, Ashwin. Hare Krishna, Prabhuji, Danvat Pranam. Please accept our humble obeisances on behalf of everybody in this group who have joined and are about to join. Prabhuji, we are reading the Srimad Bhagavatam. We are on Canto 1, Chapter 9. Chapter 9 is the passing away of Bhishma Dev, and we are on text 25 today. Prabhuji, we hand over to you. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Thank you, Mataji. So, such a wonderful chapter with Bhishma Dev's passing. So let's just recap where we've how we've come to this point, right? So the Mahabharata was just taken place at the battlefield of Kurukshetra, and now Yudhishthira Maharaj is a bit anxious about the future, right? So he, along with the rest of the Pandavas, Krishna, and even great scholarly yogis and mystics, they all come back to the battlefield of Kurukshetra after the war to meet and spend time with Bhishma Dev, who's lying on his deathbed on a bed of arrows, right? And then we see, because the Pandavas are just lamenting about the situation, we see Bhishma Dev is just glorifying the Pandavas, right? In that situation, he's glorifying the achievements that they've had. And along with it, he's explaining how the situation that they're in is actually attributed to the factor of time, right? To the factor of Kal, and also the Supreme Lord. And then he goes on to establish that Krishna himself is that Supreme Lord, who the Pandavas considered their dear friend, is actually that Supreme Lord himself. And Bhishma Dev, during the last few verses that we would have read and discussed, he's starting to describe and present a very sweet and wonderful glorification of Krishna, of the Supreme Lord. And with it, he basically requests and starts to share some appreciation for how Krishna is present in front of Bhishma Dev in such a time. And he requests that Krishna, please stay with me, right? He goes, kindly await me at that moment when I quit this material body, right? That's the last thing we would have heard yesterday. And now Bhishma Dev's finished talking. And now we move on to today's verse, where Yudhishthira Maharaj now starts speaking. And it's not that he's just expressing words of gratitude or words of compassion towards Bhishma Dev's situation. He's starting to ask questions, right? As our verse says, after hearing Bhishma Dev speak in that appealing tone, asked him in the presence of all great rishis about the essential principles of various religious duties. Now let's just pause for a moment and let's just think about somebody who we know. I'm sure many of us have had the experience of somebody close to us in a similar situation, on their deathbed, maybe in hospital, maybe at home, and we've gone to meet them, and specifically if we can think of somebody who's elder to us, maybe parents, grandparents, something like that. How would we interact with them in such a situation, right? Would we be talking to them in a tone of, let me ask them questions to understand how I need to move forward in life, how I need to live my life, right? Ask them questions that are related to us. Or would we be thinking about how can we talk about them? How can we find ways to comfort them and support them in that situation? Would we be trying to find comfort and solace about what the future holds for us? Or would we be trying to find ways to help alleviate them of the anxiety that they're going through, right? They're leaving the body. They don't know what's next. They don't know how we're going to interact. Their whole life they've spent serving us, helping us grow. And now at that moment, it's our time to support them, right? That's the usual thought process that we'll go through. And yet here we have Yudhishthira Maharaj, grandson of Bhishma Dev. Bhishma Dev, as we will remember, and I'm sure it's been shared by many of the speakers on this Zoom call, that Bhishma Dev looked after all the Pandavas so dearly, was so affectionate towards them, helped them grow, not just as Kshatriyas, but just helped them grow and navigate life in general. And here is Yudhishthira Maharaj asking about the essential principles of various religious duties. Isn't that a bit strange in a way? In the purport, Prabhupada explains that Maharaj Yudhishthira was inspired by Lord Krishna to ask. Now, previously, Krishna and Yudhishthira Maharaj had a similar sort of conversation, but Yudhishthira Maharaj wasn't really buying it, right? It wasn't that Krishna had failed, right, or that he didn't succeed in explaining to Yudhishthira Maharaj. In fact, Krishna wanted Yudhishthira Maharaj to ask Bhishma Dev. Not just ask Bhishma Dev, but ask Bhishma Dev in the presence of all these great personalities, right? Early in the chapter, we heard that there were various elderly sages, right? Like Parvata Muni, right? One of the oldest sages in existence. There was Narada Muni, who many of us know. He travels around the material creation, just imparting knowledge, guidance to all the great personalities that we hear about in the Bhagavatam. Throughout the Bhagavatam, Narada Muni is present, giving guidance, advice, even to Kamsa, for example. There's also Vyasadeva who's present. Who's Vyasadeva? The compiler of the Vedic literatures. In the presence of all these great personalities, Krishna wanted Yudhishthira Maharaj to question Bhishma Dev. Then let's reflect on the situation also, right? As we mentioned, Bhishma Dev was on a bed of arrows, right? But Prabhupada explains in the purport again, that Bhishma Dev at that time was not only lying on a deathbed of arrows, but was greatly aggrieved because of that state. So it wasn't that Bhishma Dev was a mystic yogi, who had learned the art of how to lie on sharp objects, or as many sort of artists do these days, just lying down on a bed of spikes or something like that. No, he was actually in pain. And if you think about what happened, he was shot with those arrows. So the arrows had pierced through his body. So he wasn't just lying on top of the arrows. He was actually, the arrows were holding him up, and without the arrows, he wouldn't have been able to move. So Bhishma Dev was actually in pain here. Can we imagine the pain of being struck by so many arrows and lying on the deathbed of arrows, right? We can just reflect back on any times we've experienced any sort of pain in our life, right? Pain or distress. Maybe we've cut our fingers whilst chopping, or maybe whilst we're walking, we've just stubbed our toe on the door or something. Or whilst cooking, we've burnt ourselves. Or just the generic thing, like even just think about whenever we've caught the cold or a flu or a fever or something like that. The distress we go through in that moment, right? It might not be for an extended period of time, but even in that moment. But where was our consciousness then? We just cut ourselves. What is the immediate thought that comes to mind? The pain, right? And then we're trying to find ways of how to alleviate the pain. Now we've come into Krishna consciousness, we might go, oh, Krishna, and attribute the pain to something Krishna's given. We're calling out to Krishna, but our consciousness is still in the pain, right? So in those moments, all we're thinking about is our pain, the pain that we're receiving and experiencing. But in comparison to Bhishma Dev, it's like a pinprick, right? The pains that we've gone through in our life, majority of us, is like a pinprick in comparison to what Bhishma Dev is experiencing with the bed of arrows. And let's also not forget that Bhishma Dev had the boon, right? He had the benediction that he could leave his body anytime he wanted, right? He received that benediction from his father. So as soon as he started to experience these intense pains and aggravation from the bed of arrows, he could have gone, right, I've got this boon, I'm going to use it. and just alleviate myself from the pain. But he chose not to. He chose to experience that pain instead of immediately leaving his body, right? So here we have Bhishma Dev tolerating all these bodily pains. And on the other hand, we have Yudhishthira Maharaj asking him all these other questions, despite the presence of all these learned sages, right? Superior to Bhishma Dev in their learnings as well. And here we have Prabhupada in the purport indicating that Krishna wanted this to happen. Krishna inspired for this to happen. So why would Krishna want to orchestrate such a thing? Why would he want to put Bhishma Dev through such anxiety, through such aggravation and distress, and then have his own grandson asking him questions about life? That too in the presence of all these other sages that could have probably answered the same questions, right? Why would Krishna orchestrate this? Krishna did this to showcase the glories of Bhishma Dev as his pure devotee, right? He wanted to establish how bhakti yoga, how the art of, or the practice of bhakti and being a devotee is superior to all other forms of yoga, right? In the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna, in chapter 6, Krishna says, Yoginam api sarvesham mat gaten antara atmanaha shraddhavan bhajite yomam same yukta tamomataha. Of all the yogic processes, of all the yogis, one who is with great faith always abides in Krishna, thinks of Krishna, and renders transcendental service to Krishna, is most intimately united with Krishna in yoga. And that is the highest of all yoga. That's Krishna saying it. So Krishna, through this situation, wanted to prove Bhishma Dev's superior devotion, his pure devotional aspect. And the fact that Bhakti Yoga, devotees are higher than all other forms of yoga. And we know Bhishma Dev was always meditating on how to please the Lord. Whether it was with the Lord or against the Lord, he was always thinking about what would give Krishna, the Lord, the most pleasure. So it wasn't that he was just a great personality whose passing Krishna as the Supreme Lord wanted to be in the presence of. No, he was also a great devotee, and with that he had full knowledge. And what is that full knowledge? In the Srimad Bhagavatam mentioned in Canto 4, O Lord, who have a lotus navel, if a person happens to associate with a devotee whose heart always hankers after your lotus feet, seeking always their fragrance, he is never attached to the material body or in a bodily relationship to offspring, friends, home, wealth, and wife, which are very, very dear to materialistic persons. Indeed, he does not care for them. And in the purport, Srila Prabhupada explains, because a devotee knows that he is not the body, he is never affected by bodily happiness or distress. He is not interested in bodily relationships with wife, children, home, bank balance, etc., or in the distress and happiness which comes from these things. This is the special advantage of being a devotee. This status of life is possible only when a person is interested in associating with a pure devotee who always enjoys the fragrance of the lotus feet of the Lord. Isn't that the situation we see Bhishma Dev in? Right? He's going through so many bodily discomforts by being on that bed of arrows. He has his family in front of him, but the Pandavas, the other part of his family died in the battle. But he is not being affected by any of that. From a material point of view, his position is most disturbing, right? Bed of arrows, 3/4 of the family is gone, only a few are left. He gave up the kingdom, right? The heir to the kingdom for his father, and what has the generations done? For each other, right? But he tolerated all of that bodily distress, all of the extended bodily distress. And what did he achieve? He achieved the opportunity that at the time of his passing, he had the association of the Lord. And Yudhishthira Maharaj, we see that, of course, he knew the glories of Bhishma Dev from before this, But just hearing Bhishma Dev that in such a situation, Bhishma Dev's consciousness is so elevated, right? That he's not thinking about all these things. He's more concerned about moving forward. He's more concerned about helping Yudhishthira Maharaj and everybody else present be the most Krishna conscious they can, right? Yudhishthira Maharaj is really looking up to Bhishma Dev and going, this is the pure devotee that I want to associate with. I want to get the transcendental knowledge from this pure devotee so that I myself can grow in that devotion. And throughout the rest of the chapter, we'll see how glorious Bhishma Dev's passing actually is. How he really looks at the Supreme Lord in such a way that death just becomes a beautiful aspect of life as opposed to something that we're all fearing. So by Krishna's arrangement, right, in this chapter itself, by Krishna's arrangement, through that interaction between Yudhishthira Maharaj and Bhishma Dev's passing, we actually get a glimpse, we actually get the deeper significance of what it really means to have spiritual enlightenment. Right? We get to see the glories of the pure devotees, how even in these most adverse positions, these most adverse situations, they're not concerned about themselves, they're not concerned about their situation. Their full focus is on the mission of the Lord. Their full focus is on, as Bhishma Dev is doing here, preaching about the glories of the Lord. Does it remind us of somebody else who did that? Who at the time of death, death is imminent, but even in those final moments, all they're thinking about is, how can I preach about the glories of the Lord?
Srila Prabhupada?
Srila Prabhupada, yes. Right? Most of us, in fact, all of us have probably heard, read, maybe even seen the clip of Prabhupada's final moments, I think it's like a 30-minute clip. I think I've seen one. And what is he doing? Is he lying in bed just waiting for final moments? No. He's actually preaching. He's actually looking to compile the Srimad Bhagavatam for us, to glorify the Lord and for us. And if we haven't seen the video yet, I'd highly recommend anybody who hasn't, just go on YouTube, just search for Prabhupada's final days, and I'm sure you'll find like a good clip on that. I was listening to a senior Prabhupada disciple actually a couple of days ago, and he was sharing about Prabhupada's final moments, and he was sharing about how Prabhupada was so weak in that position, right, on his deathbed, for days, in fact. But what he would do is he'd have one disciple holding the Bhagavatam, one disciple reading the Bhagavatam, one disciple holding the dictaphone, one disciple doing different disciples doing different things for him, because he couldn't do it himself. But the only thing he would do is speak. Not speaking about, oh, my situation, what's going to happen to ISKCON. No, he's preaching. He's thinking about, how can I make sure that all these disciples that I have, all these devotees, not just present here today, but the future generations, our generation, for the next 10,000 years, how will they be firmly established in Krishna consciousness? He's spending his final moments trying to give us the Srimad Bhagavatam. Right? Now, how many of us in our final moments, right? If we knew that, okay, Prabhupada's body was in that state, but if we knew that, okay, a week later, like Raksha Maharaj, or a month later or something, okay, our time's going to come, how many of us will be thinking about, okay, yes, Krishna, let me think about Krishna. Let alone, how many of us are going to think about, let us spend this time glorifying the Lord? As devotees, if we have some consciousness, we'll probably be thinking, okay, let me practice my Krishna consciousness. I need to go deep myself. But here we have Prabhupada who's thinking about preaching, not just practicing Krishna consciousness, but preaching Krishna consciousness in his final moments. And somebody who is currently still present on this earth also comes to mind here is Gandham Maharaj, who's also going through a similar situation where he knows, his time is limited, but he's not just fully caved in. He wants to preach as much as he can. And then when he's unable to preach, then he'll cave in and, focus on his Krishna consciousness, right? How many of us could do that, right? And such devotees who can are what we would call as glorious devotees, right? Would glorify them, not just on this call, but other calls that we have, maybe one-to-one conversations, would just find ways to glorify them. They'll come up in a conversation, and then what will happen next is they just get glorified. But somebody like Bhaja Govindam Das, in the middle of London, he's going to pass away. Who's going to remember him, right? But these devotees who are full on Krishna conscious and full on focused on preaching Krishna consciousness, like Bhishma Dev, like Prabhupada, they're the ones that get glorified. And actually, Prabhupada shares in his purport, in our verse for today, 1925, that Krishna wants to establish the glories of his devotees. Krishna wants the glories of the devotees to be established, right? And Krishna does this through various scriptures. He says the same thing. He indicates the same thing. We can look at the Bhagavad Gita, right? The Mahabharata war, when Arjun and Krishna were having the conversation, what was Krishna doing? What was going on? Krishna was trying to convince Arjun that just do your duty, fight. You're a Kshatriya, fight. Attain victory. And if you don't attain victory, it doesn't matter because you'll attain so much. Don't worry about the happiness, the distress. Don't worry about success, failure. Just focus on your duty. But with it, he says something in chapter 11. He goes, Maya hatam stvam jahima vyastishta yudhyas vajeta sitane sarpatam. He says, therefore, kill them and do not be disturbed. Simply fight and you will vanquish your enemies in battle. Right? The first part of it is that Krishna's already done the work of killing all the warriors from the Kaurava army. Krishna's already done it. All he's doing is telling Arjun, don't be disturbed. Just be the warrior that you're meant to be and just take the glorification that comes. You don't have to do anything. You just have to be present. You just have to do what you're doing anyway and just take the glorification. When was the last time we've come into contact with somebody, whether it's at work or anywhere, who has gone, Kritika Mataji, I'll do all your work for you. You just be there present, just show your face and go, I did everything. Don't say my name. You take all the glorification. You take all the credit. When was the last time that happened? Even in the devotee circle, in the devotee community, it'll be rare to find somebody who will do all your service for you, all the cooking, like say you've got kitchen duties in the temple, you're looking after all the cooking. It'll be very rare to find somebody who has come and just gone, I'll do everything for you, you go relax. You just be present in the kitchen, I'll do everything, and then you can take all the credit. And if we do come across somebody, we know that they're an advanced devotee. They're so selfless that they're willing to do the service and take nothing in return. Right? And that's basically what Krishna is trying to teach us here. He's trying to teach us the value, the quality of being a true Vaishnava, of being truly selfless, right? Taking no credit for oneself, but passing it on to others. And that's the glory of a pure devotee. We can see Prabhupada. Whenever he'd get glorified, what would he say? Oh, this is nothing, My spiritual master would have done so much more. It's only because of my spiritual master that all this is happening. It's because of my spiritual master that all of you have come to me. All these glorious devotees, they never take any credit for themselves. They attribute it to their spiritual master, to Krishna, or the other devotees. And at the end of the purport for today, Krishna says, the Father likes to see the Son become more famous than himself. The Lord declares very empathetically that worship of his devotee is more valuable than the worship of the Lord himself. And this comes from Krishna himself. In Canto 11, when Krishna is speaking to Uddhava, he uses the phrase Mad Bhakta Puja Bhihadika. Right? Mad Bhakta, so my devotees are worthy of worship. That too, not any type of worship. Right? He says Abhihadika, superior in quality. The worship of my devotees is superior to the worship of me. Krishna himself says it. The Lord is so generous to his pure devotees that worship of the pure devotees is being described as superior by the Lord himself. Even in Nectar of Devotion, Prabhupada and Rupa Goswami, when they're quoting the Adi Puran, there's a conversation between Krishna and Arjun, where Krishna says, "My dear Partha, one who claims to be my devotee is not so. Only a person who claims to be the devotee of my devotee is actually my devotee." And then in explanation of that, Prabhupada describes, no one can approach the Supreme Personality of Godhead directly. One must approach him through his pure devotees. Therefore, in the system of Vaishnava activities, the first duty is to accept a devotee as spiritual master and then to render service unto him. Coming from Krishna himself. And then also we know there's a conversation between Shiva and Parvati or Durga in the Padma Puran, which is also cited in the Chaitanya Charitamrita, where Shiva is telling Durga Ma that, "My dear Devi, although the Vedas recommend worship of demigods, the worship of Vishnu is topmost. However, above the worship of Lord Vishnu is the rendering of service to Vaishnavas who are related to Lord Vishnu." In so many of our literatures, the glorious position, the glorious worship of the pure devotees of the Lord is actually established very, very nicely. And it's not that the pure devotees demand or expect our worship, right, for some self-interest or anything. It's actually the fact that the pure devotees like Bhishma, they like Prabhupada, they interact with Krishna directly. They have that vision. They know what sort of worship will please the Lord. And all they want to do is engage us in that service. They want to engage us in a way that they know will please the Lord. Otherwise, what qualification do we have to see or worship the Lord in a way that the Lord wants? Right? We wouldn't know where to start. Right? It's described that Krishna is like fire, right? So if there's fire here, and if we want to come in contact with the fire, if we just reach our hand out, what would happen? We just burn our hand. But if we get a stick, right, and hold that stick to the fire is in contact with the stick and the stick is in contact with the fire. But by us holding the stick, we can say that we're also in contact with the fire, right? And in the same way, the fire is Krishna, the hand is us. But what's that via medium, that stick in the middle? That's the pure devotee, that's the spiritual master. The spiritual master, the pure devotees are always in contact with Krishna, the fire. But by us reaching out to those pure devotees, by us serving those pure devotees, we actually become eligible, right, to receive that mercy from those pure devotees so that we can also be in contact with Krishna. And that's the whole mission of the spiritual master, is how to get his or her disciples to come in contact with Krishna best. Right? When we find someone who has bhakti, right, in their heart, right, a pure devotee who has unflinching faith in modern science, in the TV shows, no. Unflinching faith in the spiritual master, in Krishna. Absolutely 100% dedication, 100% faith that, okay, if Krishna is saying this to me, if my spiritual master is saying this to me, this is what is best for me. When we come in contact with such devotees, when we serve them with sincerity, then we become eligible to receive that drop of mercy that they impart. We become eligible to develop our own bhakti. We often hear the phrase, bhakti comes from bhakti, right? But this is what it means. It means that by serving those who have bhakti in their heart, we are developing the opportunity to develop bhakti in our heart by their mercy, not by our endeavor. Our endeavor just gives rise to the opportunity. but it's their mercy that then imparts that bhakti onto us. And there's a wonderful pastime with Prabhupada where I don't remember the full details, but somebody was asking Prabhupada about and speaking to him about all these great mystic yogis who could do, perform all these different siddhis. And then they had gone to Prabhupada, oh, you're a great yogi. Can you show us a miracle? And Prabhupada just looks at his disciples and just points to them, goes, this is my miracle. Right? Now we can think about it. Like when we think of miracles, we're thinking, okay, creating, I don't know, a house out of his hand, or, like $1 million out of his pocket or something like that. But when we look at what Prabhupada has done, right, just by his devotion, if we think about the early Prabhupada disciples, like what sort of background do they come from, right? So many of them were involved with things that are even unthinkable for devotees, let alone unspeakable for us. That was their background, breaking all the 4 regulated principles, not once, not twice, but practically their life revolved around breaking the regulated principles. And yet many of them today have been such great Vaishnavas present on this earth after Prabhupada has left the planet, or even whilst he was on the planet. So many great Vaishnavas have come off the back of Prabhupada's bhakti, right? Following the 4 regulated principles. Unthinkable back then. Chanting 16 rounds, 2.5 hours a day. Who had the time for it? They were so busy and engaging in their own sense gratification. Waking up at 4 a.m. for Mangal Arati. I mean, most of their day ended at 4 a.m. right? Because they'd be up all night partying, pubs, drinking, illicit gambling, sex, etc. They'd be going to bed at 4 a.m. But here they are, waking up for Mangal Arati at 4 a.m. Staying in the temple, preaching, temple services, book distribution. They got engaged so much in Krishna consciousness. Yet that was their background. That was where they started. How is that not a miracle? That's what the association of pure devotees can bring. We may think that we're doing so wrong. I'm struggling with so many anarthas that we have, so many attachments that we have. But by associating with the pure devotees, if these, they're great Vaishnavas, but if these disciples of Prabhupada who were engaged in so many illicit activities could become purified and become pure devotees, then there's no doubt that it would apply to us, that would work on us, right? So we really have to take it to our own hearts, right? Yes, we should engage, we should all be engaged in some sort of service, right? Temple services, book distribution, whatever it is. We should all be chanting, ideally a minimum of 16 rounds. We should all be reading regularly, listening to classes regularly. But that's not enough. Our own endeavor is not enough. If we really want to grow in our devotional service, we really have to look around us and find those devotees who we can associate with that are pure devotees, who have unflinching faith, have fully dedicated themselves to the mission, fully dedicated themselves to Krishna, right? Who have full faith in their spiritual master and the Lord. And we should make it our mission, actually, to serve them in whatever capacity we have, whether that's physical services, like cooking for them or driving them to places. If we can't do that, then the very least we can do, and in fact, the most potent thing that we can do, is listen to them and take on their instructions. They're not speaking just for time pass, they're speaking to benefit us. And actually, ultimately, if we think about it, what is the greatest service we can do for all these great Vaishnavas in our lineage, including those that are present? It is to support them in their mission to glorify the Lord. That's what Bhishma Dev is doing here. In his final moments, he's finding ways to glorify the Lord. And Yudhishthira Maharaj has supported him by asking him those questions. Now, it's not that we have to, wait for them to pass, to be, about to pass the body and go, okay, like, let me help you be Krishna conscious. No, it's actually, we're not helping them act in any way. But by us being available to serve them, us being available to go, okay, I want to support your mission. I want to be one of your instruments to spread the glories of Krishna. Then we'll actually learn what it means to be Krishna conscious. Then we'll actually imbibe the mood. We'll actually develop that opportunity to be more Krishna conscious, to actually develop our bhakti. So I end with a quote from Gopal Krishna Goswami Maharaj. I also listened to him a few days ago. So very relevant for me as well. And I think it really emphasizes what it means to be a devotee, right? All of us say, oh yes, Prabhuji, you're a great devotee. Prabhuji, you're a devotee, or Mataji, you know? But I think this really encapsulates what it means to be a devotee. And by no means am I quoting this in the mood of saying that I'm reaching or anywhere close to it. I myself, I'm trying hard to do this myself, right? So a devotee means one who has complete faith in the instructions of the spiritual master and the Supreme Lord. With complete faith in the instructions of the spiritual Lord, that without surrendering to him, the living entities cannot be happy. A devotee isn't concerned about his own welfare, his own comfort, but rather his prime concern is to have the opportunity to distribute the Lord's mercy, the Lord's message. The Lord's message is the Lord's mercy, because there is no reason why the Lord should be interested in broadcasting his message. But because the Lord is our ever well-wisher, because the Lord loves us, therefore he is giving us his message. A devotee is always anxious to broadcast the message of the Supreme Lord. That's from Gopal Krishna Goswami Maharaj. So let us really think about how, like Yudhishthira Maharaj, right, we can take the transcendental knowledge, we can take up to the service of the pure devotees, and how, like Bhishma Dev, we can develop ourselves to be fixed up in spending every moment, right? We shouldn't be wasting any moment. We should be spending every moment in finding ways to glorify the Lord in all circumstances, whatever our external or internal situation is. We should all be looking for ways in which we can be instruments of the Lord in the association of the devotees under the guidance of the pure devotees. And just a plug for December, since it's coming around the corner, right? What is that one of those ways that we can really engage and really find ways to please and serve the pure devotees? Book marathon. The December book marathon is coming up. It's a great way for all of us to push ourselves, to be a part of the plan of the Lord, to be a part of the mission of the pure devotees, to preach the Lord's glories, right? So wherever we are, whether we're in Eldoret or any other congregation around the world, I'm sure if you were to ask one of your local congregation members, there'd be some sort of book distribution going on in December, some sort of way for us to support the movement to spread the glories of the Lord. Surrender. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Shabbat ki jai.
Hare Krishna, thank you so much, Roji, for this excellent class. Are there any questions or comments from the group? Prabhuji, till devotees are thinking of questions, I have few. In times of, I mean, this is Bhishma Dev we are talking of, who's lying on the bed of arrows, and he is still thinking of God. But I have a slight back pain, and I would forget about Krishna and concentrate just on the pain, or as you said, cutting off the finger, or at the most we'll say Krishna, or sometimes you even go and say, oh Krishna, what did I do to deserve this much, and why did you do it? I have this important meeting, and now see, I've burnt my hand and I can't do this experiment, or whatever. So how do we get out of that, Prabhuji? I mean, we are all human beings, and we are aspiring, we are still not on the path, and we have now recognized that this is how we behave. So how do we?
Wonderful question. It's something I myself am struggling with. But no, for me, it's often when I get sick, I'll forget Krishna, which is the most unfortunate place to be. But yeah, no, I can share something that I've kind of heard from other senior devotees. One big aspect that differentiates like the practice of pure devotees, I don't want to say pure devotees, but the practice of pure devotees and us, is that when we're practicing, we're not really into the reading or the listening, right? We're still thinking about what we need to do next. Okay, after I've done my 15 minutes of reading of this chapter, I'll move on to this thing, that thing. But when we look at the practice of pure devotees, right, or they don't even have to be like Srila Prabhupada level pure, right? They could just be senior, more advanced than us in any which way. And Prabhupada says that we're all pure devotees. Some are pure devotees, some are pure devotees in the making. But those who are more further along the path than us, when we look at them or when we even ask them, we'll understand that one of the big differentiators is the absorption in the activity that they're doing. And this is something I think I've mentioned before on this call. Like there was a devotee whilst I was in Radhadesh, I had the good fortune opportunity to read the Bhagavatam with them. And my mind was going all over, my eyes were going all over. I was seeing devotees walk here and there. And I was forgetting what I just read. I was the one reading and I forgot what I was reading. But the other advanced devotee, he was on the ball. He remembered practically the purport in summary format, at least, paragraph by paragraph. And when I asked him, this is the thing that he really picked out, absorption. So when we're really involved in whether it's chanting or reading or listening or kirtan or anything, the mind will come up with so many thoughts, right? We'll think about, okay, yes, I'm time pressured today. I just want to get my 15 minutes done and then go do something else. But if we just go accept that, okay, we have 15 minutes, we know that already, right? When we went to the activity, we knew we only had 15 minutes. So why are we spending those 15 minutes thinking about, I only have 15 minutes, I need to do something else? Let's just focus those 15 minutes on the activity we're doing. Try and be absorbed in that. Try and bring our mind back to what the actual activity we're doing. Now, you might be thinking, okay, that works when we're doing the activity, but what about like the other times when I'm just traveling or whatever? But what we'll find is that when we're more present in the moment, in Krishna consciousness, then as we're traveling and so on, that's the thought that will naturally become our go-to thought to have. And I can't remember who, I believe it was one of the presidents of the United States, like one of the historic ones, but he had to have, I think it was an amputation or something, like he had to have an operation where he refused to go under anesthesia, sorry, I can't say the phrase, but basically have it numbed down, right? He refused to go through it. But instead what he did was he preoccupied his mind and conversation with something else. And we see this actually with children and when they're being given injections. The nurse will just sweet talk the child and talk about different things that the child will be interested in. So that instead of being concerned about what's going on here, they're concerned about the conversation. So we can use that sort of example to our advantage. If we're absorbing ourselves in something transcendental, then whatever we're going through bit by bit, depending on what sort of consciousness we're at, we'll find we're less affected by it. So it's still good that the first thing that comes to mind is, oh, Krishna, you know, in those sorts of moments. That's progression. Before we would have just gone, oh, damn it, you know, like, or, you know, all these other words that come to our mind. But the fact that now we're calling out to Krishna is still a step up. But the next step up is to start thinking about Krishna positively in those moments. And then a step up is whatever's happening is happening. Let me just find a way to glorify the Lord. So I don't know if that helps. But
yeah, thank you very much. That helps. Living in the moment is what is highly recommended. And I think it has value as well.
Krishna conscious moment.
Yeah, living in the Krishna conscious moment. Yes, that's right. Any other questions or comments from the group? So I can ask my second question then. Guruji, in the ISKCON movement, maybe we don't have any lack of devotees and everybody is a pure devotee in making if they are not pure. And at least when we are starting off, everybody is at a higher level than you are. So we do not have the lack of these personalities around us because we have their association. But what about those people who are not in the movement? How would they recognize a pure devotee? Who is a pure devotee for them?
Good question. The thing with you kind of answered from a devotee aspect, right? Like when we just come into the movement, we see, okay, everybody around us is more pure than us. But when we look at the non-devotees, right, for some reason our mentality shifts and we like separate the two instead of seeing that it's just another level further that requires an extra step, right? We all started off by being non-devotees, and then we took the step to become practicing devotees, and then growing in our Krishna consciousness. But that is the first step. So on one level, for those who are not in the movement, you could say, I'll rephrase that, those who are not practicing a Vaishnav, sort of a Vaishnavism in a sense, then anyone who is practicing is superior to them in one way, right, in the practice. So they can look at them and get their association and grow. And as they grow, as they start reading, like Nectar Instruction is a prime one, they really understand, okay, what are the different levels of devotees, the categories of devotees, how to associate with different types of devotees, different levels and so on. And then they can, through that knowledge, they'll be able to better judge and understand, okay, how to recognize the topmost devotees who are, you know, Srila Prabhupada level, acharyas, etc., maharajas, etc., versus those who are then their friend circle sort of devotional levels, and then those who they need to try and give mercy to. So I think it's just part of the process, but it's not unheard of that somebody who is so-called non-devotee comes in contact with a very senior devotee, and they just feel that energy that the senior devotee is able to give, and they recognize that this is pure-hearted, and that's how Prabhupada started off, right? So many sadhus, so many swamis had gone to America before. Many of his early disciples had probably been in contact with them before, but they found something different in Prabhupada. They saw that he was pakka in what he was saying and what he was doing. So yeah, I don't think that answers your question properly, but yeah, I think for those who are not practicing spirituality in some way, then anybody who is sincerely practicing with intelligence is somebody they should take the association of to grow. And it's not that we keep them to ourselves, you know, like colleague at work, okay, I'll keep them to myself, I'm the only association they get. No, we guide them to our seniors because we know that they'll be able to guide better.
Mm-hmm. Yes, Roji, I see. I've understood now. Are there any other questions or comments? There are no more questions or comments. I know we are going to be exhausting our time. I'll hand over to Path Prabhu. Prabhu, Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji. Yes. Thank you very much, Prabhuji. It's a nice and sober class. It's very wonderful. You describe all the points and how the Prabhupada's mission and how he preaching and everything. What is the quality of a devotee? And like we are just excusing if a small problem, then we are excusing, oh, today is too much tired, headache, we cannot come Mangalarti, we will not finish my chanting. But we can see how Pitamaha Bhishma is laying on the bed of arrows and he's waiting, and he's also giving the lecture and addressing, also welcoming all the guests around him. So this is the devotee, the quality of a senior and topmost devotee. Although he is the Mahajan, he has the great knowledge and everything. And he has the control on his body, mind, soul and everything. But we can learn from him how his Pitamaha Bhishma. Thank you very much, Prabhuji, for your nice class. Also, thanks all the devotees who joined here. I request all the devotees, please unmute and chant Hare Krishna mantra. Please join.
Hare
Hare
Krishna,
Krishna,
Hare
Krishna,
Krishna, Krishna, Hare Hare,
Hare
Hare
Rama,
Rama, Hare Rama, Rama
Rama
Rama, Hare
Rama.
Hare. Vancha kalpa tarubhyasya kripa sindhubhya eva cha patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namah. Srila Prabhupada ki
Jai.
His Grace Braj Govind Prabhu ki jai.
Jai.
ISKCON Eldoret ki. Jai.
Jai. Jai. Very good. Hare Krishna.
Krishna.
Thank you, Prabhuji. Hare Krishna.